The entire NBA knows that if the Knicks are looking to trade for one player, that player's name is Joel Embiid. But should we be considering another superstar? According to one former NBA player and Celtics legend, he believes that the Knicks' most realistic trade target is actually Zion Williamson. We're going to break down that report, see exactly what Celtics legend made these comments, and see how realistic it is that the Knicks could target and trade for Zion Williamson. All of this and so much more today. Let's get started. Celtics legend Paul Pierce believes that Zion Williamson to the Knicks is the most realistic trade for New York. Now, I'm not going to hold back. I used to despise and hate Paul Pierce. I remember him playing for the Celtics, and I remember what he used to do to the Knicks each and every time he faced the Knicks. I remember the infamous bow in the Garden. I can never forget or forgive that man for all of the nightmares he gave me when he played the Knicks. However, now that he's retired, he seems like he's calling the game just a little bit more fair and not being totally biased to the Celtics, as you might think he would be now that he's retired. And on Kevin Garnett's podcast, he recently made an appearance and he talked about the Knicks and their most realistic trade targets. Now, we all know that Joel Embiid is the number one on that list, at least to most NBA insiders and sources. But according to Paul Pierce, he says that Joel Embiid should not be the name that Knicks fans are looking at. He actually says we should be looking at Zion Williamson. According to Sports Illustrated, though the running favorite among Knicks fans and observers has been Joel Embiid, Paul Pierce has a hard time envisioning Embiid's current employers, the Philadelphia 76ers, trading the reigning MVP within the conference. Pierce instead labels New Orleans Pelicans star Zion Williamson as the Knicks' most realistic trade option. Pierce says the following exactly: if things flame out in New Orleans this year, and he gets hurt again, or they don't make the playoffs, or something don't go right, man, you've got to explore that. Kevin Garnett agrees with Pierce. He even called such a move a game changer, hinting that he and Pierce would travel to Madison Square Garden to take such a game personally. There's a lot of ifs in what Paul Pierce just said, and I'm not going to lie. When healthy, Zion Williamson is a force. He looks like a generational talent, and he looks like that all-star player, that superstar level player that we always hear about. The problem is, when healthy, when. We always use these terms when speaking about Zion, and that's been the biggest problem with Zion for his entire career. He's never been healthy. He's never played a full season healthy, folks. He's never been able to impact the game when his team needed him most. So if another team were to trade for him, and let's say he does get unhealthy again, he does get injured again, and then his value goes down a little bit, and then another team does trade for him, then you have the same type of risk and concerns as the Pelicans did. Because if you get him healthy and you surround him with talent, what happens? Because you're only going to go as far as Zion Williamson is going to take you. And if he's not healthy enough to take you to the playoffs or the finals, then why would you trade for him? To basically get through the regular season, be a playoff team, and not be able to show anything for getting to the playoffs each and every year? Because that might be the best that Zion can give you if he doesn't stay healthy. And this year is a big year for Zion. He looks like he's in good shape. He looks like he's moving better. And honestly, when he's on the floor with that Pelicans team, they look dangerous. They look very, very good. And as they continue to play together, I think the chemistry with that team is going to get better and better and better. But they're not there yet. And if Zion gets hurt and he doesn't stay healthy, that team's hopes and dreams of getting to the playoffs or being a contending team in the Western Conference is going to burn out extremely fast. And that is the biggest issue with Zion and that entire Pelicans team. Because no matter how talented they are, they still are vulnerable to the fact that Zion is their best player. And if he's not healthy and on the floor, that team is going to suffer. And a real quick shout out to CJ McCollum. Unfortunately, if you didn't hear the news, he had one of his lungs collapse. I believe it was his right lung. Shout out to CJ and his family. I wish him the best during this time. I hope his recovery goes well. He comes back fast and he joins his team very, very quickly. And this is not something that stops his career. I know we are a Knicks channel through and through, but at the end of the day, I'm a fan of the game and I don't want to see any player hurt. So shout out to CJ. I hope he gets better fast. But going back to this Pelicans team, as I mentioned, Zion Williamson is basically what makes that team go. And if he's not on the floor, he's going to hurt that team because he's not going to have the same impact not being there. And that team cannot replace what Zion gives them. And that's the biggest problem. So any team, whether it be the Knicks or whoever, that looks to trade for Zion is going to have the same risks and the same problems that the Pelicans have. And whatever the trade offer is that's on the table, I promise you, you're going to have to double it. Because whatever you say, even if Zion's value goes down, the fact that generational talent is always going to be attached to his name, that's what's going to have his value stay increasingly high. And if a team like the Knicks, who are basically a playoff team for the next few years, if they stay healthy and continue playing up to their potential, then they're going to be a good team, meaning their first round picks are not going to be worth that much. And if that's the case, they're going to have to give up more of them to make that trade. And that brings me to a very, very good point. What's the trade offer going to be if the Knicks were to engage in a trade to get this player? Well, if you listen to Paul Pierce, he actually has an idea on that. And you may not like it depending on if you're a fan of any of these players. According to Paul Pierce, he states that a couple of first rounders, didn't mention how many, he just says a couple, with Barrett and Randall, yeah, I think they would take that. Pierce said of the Pelicans' potential reaction to such a deal for Zion Williamson. Randall is what New Orleans needs. They need a consistent 20 and 10 guy in that spot. Which Zion, if he's healthy, but Randall's healthy. Kevin Garnett actually warmed up to the idea once Paul Pierce included RJ Barrett, reasoning that the Pelicans would get the Knicks' best players and that their youth would pave a path forward for the franchise. I don't know if that trade makes sense to me, because the hook for Zion coming to play for New York has a lot to do with RJ Barrett, somebody that he used to play with in Duke. So why would you include him in the deal? Also, would the Pelicans even want Randall back in exchange for Zion Williamson? I get what Randall can do and what he can produce, but they had him and they traded him. I don't know if they would welcome a return, even if he's a better player now than he was then. Because honestly, even if he's a 20 and 10 guy on some nights, not most nights, some nights, what does his ISO play mean for the Pelicans? Would it hurt them? Would it help them? Would he accept a number 2 or number 3 role on that team behind an Ingram, behind the CJ? You have to ask yourself that, because the issue with Randall, even though he gives you these numbers, you have to put Randall in a certain position in order to get those numbers or get a Randall that can impact the game. Because if you get Randall but don't utilize him correctly, I honestly argue that you could hurt him, hurt his value, and hurt what he could do for your team. So you have to be careful as any team looking to trade for Julius. Whether this report is true or not remains to be seen. But I can say Paul Pierce is not the first person to say this. A lot of other NBA insiders and sources have reported this. I even had Mark Berman, somebody who used to work for the New York Post and has ties with the New York Knicks and their sources. And he told me during my live interview with them that the Knicks actually checked in on Zion Williamson during this offseason. So clearly there's interest there. If the Pelicans spiral out of control, they don't do well, or Zion does get hurt again, I can see the Knicks exploring a trade. Whether or not they pull the trigger, all depends on what the deal going out is. And if it's going to be RJ, Randall, and picks, not only do I think that New Orleans would say no to that deal, I don't think the Knicks would even put that deal up there, because they know, like I do, that RJ Barrett is the key to getting Zion here. Now, honestly, for me, I don't want to take that risk giving up assets, significant assets, for Zion Williamson, because I don't know if it's going to pan out. But what about you guys? Do you think that if Zion is available, that the Knicks should trade for him? And if they do, should they give the trade offer that Paul Pierce is suggesting here? The offer again is a couple of first rounders, maybe 3 or 4 of them, unprotected most likely, and Barrett and Randall. Would you do that deal? Let me know in the comments below, because honestly, guys, I would love to hear from you. But that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, go ahead and smash that like button. Leave a comment below. But of course, guys, please subscribe to the channel. Until next time, Knicks fans. Peace.